Hello, Silas here, and I'm back with my friend Steven. Been thinking of better ways to do these intros or start with more energy so y'all can actually stay on and listen to this conversation that we're having. But Steven, say what's up to the peoples.
Hello, everyone. I was going to make one announcement. Today is my parents' 37th wedding anniversary. So, for any
Oh,
of you
okay,
listening who
good.
are friends, please feel free to reach out and congratulate them.
Well, this is not live, but you can
No,
do like a belated one whenever you actually hear
yeah.
this, because we'll probably be up like a week later when we're doing this. We're
That's
recording
all right.
this on September 28th of 2020. So to the Kirschners, uh, congratulations and happy anniversary. And it's topical for him to say that because this is the conversation series that we have talking about Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough by Lori Gottlieb, which I guess Mama Kirschner would say she did settle for Mr. Great in Papa Kirschner. But yeah,
Mhm.
so tell us a bit about this book, Stephen.
Sure. So, basically, as I've been saying, this book is about it's an exercise in reevaluating your standards when it comes to dating and relationships. I mean, the book obviously has a provocative title, but the message of the book is not literally throw standards out, marry whoever. It's more you may not be meeting the right person for a long-term partner because you're hung up on a lot of the wrong things and you're overlooking the right things. Now, the author's writing is a combination of her personal experience, but she also interviews a lot of experts, matchmakers, dating coach, relationship experts, etc. So it's like, it's some of it is anecdotal, but some of it's also well studied. Um, well, we've sort of been going through the chapters. I've been sort of summarizing them. Starting from this one on, I'm going to start skipping around a little because it's a pretty long book. I think there were 30 something chapters, or let me see here.
Yeah, we've
Um,
only gotten to chapter 10 or 11 is
oh,
how
it's
many. This is good. This is going to be the 11th part of the series. But yeah, we'll
yeah,
still have a
it's
couple more
it's
at this, even if we do the skipping around thing.
Yeah, because it's 27 chapters, and the thing is, I mean, it's definitely a great book. I mean, I read it all the way through, but it's one of those things where some of the points we're going to start repeating ourselves,
Mhm.
and some of its details about her and her friends, which are interesting, but for the sake of a discussion, it's like you're better off just reading the book because it's probably better. I did from going forward, I just want to highlight some things that I thought were particularly interesting, and then hopefully anyone listening can sort of give some feedback or thoughts.
Yeah. And as Stephen has said, this is a series that we have been doing for quite some time. This is going to be the 11th part of the series and still not the longest conversation series. I think the longest conversation series we had was Cracks in the Ivory Tower, if I'm
I
not
think so.
mistaken. That one we got up to, I think, like 14 parts in that one. So this one will at least tie that because if we get done with this, we'll have at least two more parts of this to actually get that. So with this one, it's by Lori Gottlieb. The name of the book again is "Marry Him: The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough." And in the previous parts, we normally talk about ourselves a bit more in the start and just the general ideas. But now that we've gotten this far into it, you can actually head back and check out those other ones in the series. Or if you've come from those in this series, welcome to the next part in it. And I'm just going to read the blurb from the book that's here on Amazon.com. So it's something that she is approved to put out and just gives you a general idea of what it is and probably talk a bit and then jump right into the content. Okay, so it says an eye opening, funny, painful, and always truthful in depth examination of modern relationships and a wake up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and the perfect apartment. So what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? Or what if Mr. Right had been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40 and still single, journalist Lori Gottlieb started to wonder what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment? And are we looking for those qualities when we're dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? In Marry Him, Gottlieb explores an all too common dilemma: how to reconcile the desires for happy marriage with a list of must haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her journey in search of love, discovering wisdom and surprising insights from sociologists and neurobiologists, Marshall researchers, Marshall. again, over this word. I don't trust myself with that word. Martial researchers and behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations. And so far, that's been pretty much what this book has been. And one of the reasons this book kind of spoke to Stephen and I was we've both kind of been looking into certain manosphere type of spaces, and some of the people who talk about dating, in our opinion, that's one of the, I guess there's other places where they look into dating, but in that environment, in the manosphere, we found, I've, Stephen and I have both found people who are into studying sociology from an evolutionary biologist kind of point of view and human behavioral psychology and applying that to dating. So going past not just like the game and playing numbers, that stuff doesn't really interest me that much and things like this. Like, oh, you have to look in this kind of just, no, but the actual biology behind it, the nurture behind it has developed, we've evolved in some society. That's one of the key things that I've seen in some places in the manosphere, certain people who MGTOW monk type of people who delve into that kind of scientific outlook of dating and getting into like the economics and things like that. And Lori Gottlieb has done an aspect of that in here. And she's doing it from her unique point of view, which is some more of a female take on these ideas and things that have appealed to me from this specific niche within this larger group of people looking at dating. And there was also interest for me for going future, but Stephen found himself a little lady early in the, I think it was after the part, we recorded the first part and then Stephen started dating his dating Christine. So now they're happily together, things going future, but you don't have to be single, I think, to enjoy this book. Maybe you're already with somebody and you can, oh man, I was thinking about this. This is why I'm with this person, can convince you more. Maybe some of you read someone like, okay, this is actually why I should get back out there. I'm not trying to break anyone up, but it's also good for men, for women to get an idea for men to get an idea of what women might be looking at in this point of view. For women, in my estimation, I think this has been more constructive than some of the things I see from, but that's like the pop stuff, the Cosmos,
Yeah.
the Vice. That's too pop kind of stuff. This is, I think this is a good book. She does a decent job in my estimation of just looking at this in a not clinical type of view, but just looking at the data, being a bit what's a good term? What do you think? She's not clinical. She's not divorced from it. But what do you think is different
I mean,
in how she's looked at it?
I would say somewhat objective, but I would also say
Yes.
I hesitate to say that because it's like we try to be objective, but we all have prejudices, biases, emotional hangups, whatever. But I also think I give her a lot of credit for being very honest with herself and with the audience about like, okay, here's where I screwed up. Here's
Mhm.
advice I would give women going forward. Whereas certain people, men and women both, will just blame the opposite sex and double down, where she's willing to say, okay, if I could do it all over again, knowing what I know now, here's what I do. Be careful so you don't make some of the mistakes I did, because it's like there's no going back and redoing it. Yeah.
Okay, how about this? Maybe she takes the subjective valuations that men and women have, males and females have, individual people have in relationships, and then applies them. First of all, she takes those subjective things and then says, okay, you might subjectively think that a 70-degree day is hot. But at the same point, you don't just constantly fluctuate with what 70 degrees. He says, okay, for you, when you say hot, you mean a 70-degree day. Now, if you mean a 70-degree day, this is what you like doing on 70-degree days. This is what a 70-degree day is to somebody else. So I think in that sense, she's kind of identified certain subjective type of things and defined them as what they are and tries to apply them universally or say, if you believe this is what it is, if you believe X is this, then these other things follow if you apply X, if you believe X. So you
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to believe X, but understand that if you stated that you believe X, or some other people might believe X, and one of the ongoing things that has helped me out figure life is this: problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. And that's the key thing here. What are you defining in relationships? What are you looking for in a relationship? If you're looking for a relationship to be more like up and coming, driving around, wheeling and dealing, all these kind of things, yeah, just go to New York City, maybe get on some dating apps. You can swipe right and just everybody and see who comes and gets you. Watch like She-Hulk Attorney at Law and try to do that kind of dating type of advice type of thing. Or you can read, if you want something where this book, I think, one of the people who I think could benefit the most about this are people who are I think yeah, even women, I think the target audience was definitely not, not the two of us, but probably women in their late teens, 20s, 30s, that kind of area, who are frustrated with their dating opportunities and are looking for a monogamous, long-lasting relationship with a key to get married. And I think reproduction is a key part of that whole aspect. If that's not what you're into, some of the stuff she talks about might be interesting to you, but it's not necessarily that useful. I think in some sense, I don't know. Okay, not useful, but it's not something that would um, inform your dating strategies or your approach to dating if that's not a key thing that you're looking for. I think that's kind of who she might have had in mind when she was making this kind of book, and also in I think more in urban areas rather than rural areas or like non-Western countries.
Yeah, I've mentioned her a bit, and I've been listening to her a lot. Anyone who follows my Facebook, Just Pearly Things, I like her show a lot because although she's a woman, she's read and listened to a lot of the manosphere stuff, but her audience is more diverse. Like she has hardcore feminists on, she has manosphere people. Zuby was on recently, which I thought was cool. But she also has like people that are kind of in between. There's a woman they call her auntie. She's a grandmother now, but like she gives a lot of like advice, like as a woman from a previous generation, like stuff like that. And I think those types of shows are more interesting because it doesn't just become an echo chamber. There's actually people with opposing views who will debate, push back. Some people's minds change. Some people will actually come back on the show later and their minds change. So like I think that dynamic is very valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if she's heard of this book or get Lori
I don't
Gottlieb
know.
onto that show.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
So you said we've done up to 11 chapters, but today what's going to be the topic matter? Are we jumping around, or you said we are going to the
So
particular
I'm gonna
chapter you're
skip a
talking
little.
about?
I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. I think the last chapter we did was 11, and she basically talks about meeting with the matchmaker and some men she went on dates with. Again, I mean it is interesting stuff, but I don't want to read the whole book for the reasons we mentioned, so I'm gonna just skip ahead a little. Um, I want to skip to chapter 16, which is actually the last chapter of this section. It's called "Are Women Pickier Than Men?" So I'll just dive right in here. It's a
The answer
topic
is
that
yes, by the way.
it's a topic that anyone who follows me knows my thoughts on this, but I wanted to sort of hear her take and see if there was any new info she had found or anything. So here we
I,
go.
well, wait,
Sorry, go
let
ahead.
me think. I'm trying to think. Like, okay, again, really, how do you define X? So, because I said that the answer is yes, but then now is it are good women pickier than men, or yeah, it depends on the quality of women. Yeah, it depends. It's tough.
Well,
I
my
don't know.
general stance, it's not the issue is not women trying to get the best guy they can. I mean, that's in their nature. The problem is that you have a lot of average women who think they're top tier women and they can get whatever guy they
Okay,
want.
yeah.
And then when reality doesn't pan out that way, they just get angry, upset, and wonder why. And it's like you're kind of batting out of your league a little. But the thing with a lot of men is that if men go for women that are a few steps above them in terms of looks, whatever, they just get turned down, and then they have to either lower their standards, level up, or some
Okay.
combination.
So in
But
that
like,
case, I think I do agree with you that I'm going to stick to my answer to like yes, if that's the framing of this, because let's say if you're a 10, you have 10 points of things to choose from. And this is something we've talked about several times. There's nothing wrong
yeah,
with having standards. Have standards, but if you have 10 things that are standards, expect the person you're dating with to have 10 things that are standards as well. One thing I definitely do see more with women than men is women having a list of things and then saying, "Oh, just me is enough." They're like,
yeah,
how dare he ask me to do these things, yet I'm asking them to do this. So I think it's most definitely, if you have like, let's say it's 10 points, 10 people, 10s have 10 points, 9s have 9 points, 8s have 8 points. With guys, I think you'll keep that all the way down. Like a one will be like, I'm going to pick one thing. But with women, it's more likely to have women who's like a 4, but still has the same list of
yeah.
standards as a 10. So I think in that sense, in general, I think, yeah, women would be pickier, but I guess we'll
And
get
again,
into that.
it's I'm not the first person to say this. Pearl harps about this a lot. I think also a lot of women confuse sex options for marriage options because, like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, men 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 will date, sleep, and marry women that are on their level or below, but women want to date, marry, sleep their level or up. So what happens is you have a guy who's an 8, 9, or 10 who will sleep with a woman who's average, and she thinks, "Oh, I'm great. This really good looking, wealthy, whatever guy slept with me." Then she thinks, "I can get any guy. I'm on that level." But then what ends up happening is those guys just sleep with her and none of them commit to her. Then she's wondering why she's alone, and it's like you're kind of shooting too high. Or then the other thing that happens is she'll be like, okay, fine, I'll settle for an average guy, but then kind of resent him because she keeps wondering, like,
Yeah,
could I have gotten with this other guy? But in reality, it's like, if he didn't propose to you, you're not at his level. If he's just sleeping with you and multiple other women, I mean,
yeah, yeah. That's good. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Whereas
let's get into this.
well, like I say, with men, if they shoot too high, they just get turned down. And then it's either, okay, you get in better shape, make more money, lower your standard, some combination. Okay,
Mhm.
chapter 16. So she says to her friend Kyle, a married journalist, "Oh, come on." She didn't believe his theory. If a woman's basically attractive and normal, most men will give her a chance. He explained it like this: if a girl seems like she isn't going to have too many unexplained crying jags or have too many antidepressant prescriptions or want to endlessly discuss the minutia of the relationship or go through our email or Google of our exes, that's a huge plus for us. It's like cha-ching, Yahtzee, touchdown. He may have been half kidding, but there was some truth here. Men do have slightly less stringent requirements than women. In 2007, a Time CNN poll, 80% of men and women said they thought they'd meet their perfect mate eventually. But when they were asked if they would marry someone if they didn't find Mr. or Miss Perfect, 34% of the women said yes, compared with 41% of men. Lisa Clampett, the New York matchmaker, wasn't surprised. Her male clients were often more open-minded. If she asks a guy to move his upper age limit from 30 to 35, he usually will. If she asks him to consider 5'2" instead of 5'6", he'll probably do it. Men are open to different styles, whereas women have a hard time with that. They have a lot of rules about who they'll date, who they won't. They can't let go of their ideal guy. Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist at MIT, I think we mentioned him in a previous chapter, if I recall, studied more than 20,000 online daters and found that women were pickier than men. Basically, if a woman was above a certain level of a threshold of physical attractiveness and seemed warm, the guy was interested. The man didn't microanalyze dating prospects for income, education, what kind of work they did, height, race, to the degree women analyze those categories. Women have a more concrete picture in their mind of what the guy is going to be like, Arioli said. Men have a more of a vague notion and are not so rigid about the details. Okay, that's about the initial attraction. Once they were in relationships, she knew men who nixed women for what she believed to be lame reasons. Ben, a 45-year-old banker, said he'd broken up with one girlfriend because her ankles were too thick, another because they didn't share the same taste in furniture. It's like, it's kind of strange.
Yeah,
Another because they believed they were too similar. It's like, what does that mean? We have a lot of fun, but I realized we weren't different enough to make the relationship interesting long term. In fairness, I actually know someone who described this sort of phenomenon to me. I can explain when we're done. Um, so when she asked Ben what kind of issues girlfriends might have had, they cited things like lack of attentiveness, being a procrastinator, letting his body go, but yet he couldn't deal with a girl's ankles. Um, a lawyer broke up with two women whose company he enjoyed, except at dinner parties. One was too talkative, the other was too shy. He didn't seem to realize that if he got married and had kids, they probably wouldn't be going to dinner parties anyway, so who cares? I'm just looking for the right kind of balance, he said. Kind of like the three bears. I like the comment. She goes, I guess women aren't the only ones who believe in fairy tales. Uh, well, Ariely said, when I share these stories, sometimes it's less about being picky and more about having intimacy issues. Both men and women have intimacy issues, but in general, psychologically healthy people who also want to get married, women make more calculated decisions than men. Less is needed to make men fall in love. Ask men and women what percentage of they date, and women will give a much smaller percentage. Why? Well, there's the evolutionary story, but there's also a cultural one. From an evolutionary perspective, women have had to be particular because they needed someone to help them raise their babies. In more recent times, though, cultural standards seem to have made women inordinately picky, and not just about baby-related things like income and good genes. Um, so to test this out, they asked dozens of women what they wanted in a partner, and they got the usual responses: someone attractive, funny, smart, kind, financially stable. But if they probed a bit more, they also required a guy with a dynamic emotional life, a guy who would listen to her feelings, share his feelings the way the girlfriends did. But when asked what several people, they said they want a guy who's emotionally complex because to them that signifies a thoughtful and reflective person. Okay, that seems legitimate, but don't men want a thoughtful and reflective partner too? Well, yes and no. Ariely believes that men tend to view emotional complexity differently. Emotionally complex women seem neurotic and high maintenance to a lot of men. A woman's idea of complexity might be a man's
yeah,
idea of instability. Melissa, who's 33 and admits to being emotionally complex, thinks Ariely is right. People say men settle for women who are just not challenging, but that's because I think that's what men look for: the easygoing wife, the adoring wife, the low maintenance and unchallenging wife. The wife who doesn't overthink things, what makes men seem less picky, but are men less picky, or do men and women just want different things? Okay. Thoughts and comments?
It again goes to defining the X, because when you just talk about that, is there's complex, which is like complicated type of things. There's convoluted, and then there's confusing.
Yeah.
Like confusing, you can kind of learn some things, and it's just stuff the person might just not understand themselves. Complex, I think that could be somebody who has different things. There's maybe things in the background that makes them feel a certain way about a certain thing. That it might take some time for you to understand and learn, but the person that at least understands, that he's aware of what's going on with themselves. And then there's just the convoluted, which um, people often say they're complex, where it's just convoluted, where it's just they feel a certain way, they don't want to say it, so they'll say they feel a different kind of way about it, or there's just things that they're not going to be able to explain why they feel that way. That's just yeah, that's kind of one time a similar action will make them feel a certain way, but then it changes, and all of a sudden that seems to be more convoluted. Confusing is this: I don't know things. If I went to therapy, or if I talked about this, maybe I'll figure it out. I don't know what about that particular thing. Yeah, so it's a tough thing to kind of navigate through. For any of y'all listening, do you consider yourself to be emotionally complex? I don't know.
Well, because convoluted, I thought of this when it applies to things like the gender theory stuff, because it's like you ask them to explain certain things and they can, or they deflect and whatever.
Mhm.
And I think that's more a case of like they know what they're saying doesn't add up, but they're either virtue signaling, they don't want to be labeled a bigot, they don't want some sort of legal thing taken against them, they don't want canceled, whatever. So it's like they try to make it seem like it's deep and sophisticated when it's really not, but it's like they just don't want to get pinned down on things because they don't want it being used against them. But it's also
Yeah,
like if you can't define your concept, like Pearl and her guest had some fun with some of those people, like, you know, oh, you say you're a woman. Okay, what is a woman? Someone who identifies as woman. Okay, I identify as a woman. Am I a woman? No. Okay. Well, is Caitlyn Jenner a woman? No. Well, she hasn't been a woman long enough. So, okay, so if a man becomes a woman for longer, do they become a woman? Like, none of it actually makes sense when it's broken down, but it's just on some level, it's either they want to be right or one of the other reasons I mentioned.
yeah. That's definitely something to kind of parse through there. And yeah, but she's as we've mentioned, with a lot of these things, we do agree with this, and part of the value, because as you were talking about this, was like, yeah, it makes sense. As I said in the beginning, if you're looking for actual relationships, it makes sense that women are just going to be more selective about certain things, because it was a life or death thing for 99.9% of
Yeah.
existence. It still kind of is, because the sexual dimorphism, which is the physical size. If you have if a man is trying to walk through the savannah versus a bear versus a lion, the lion is going to be somewhat less calculating about the danger of what's going around in the area, because it's a lion. It's the king of the jungle. It's the king of the savannah. So it's just going to walk around with some kind of safety and protection of just being safe. Whereas the man would be like, all right, I gotta kind of watch out. Like they might be a lion, they might be all these other things that could hurt me. But the lion will have a different kind of confidence in its kind of sense. So even different size of men, you have. This is one of the things that I think women. I hear women saying, "Oh, I can walk around safely." Again, something came up with She-Hulk. I released a different video talking about that. She had this line, where people were like, "Yes, queen," type of things, and about how she could walk around safely. Like she has to always be worried about that, so she's worried about her concerns. But despite the fact that men are more likely to get attacked, physically harmed, and things like this. And there's also small men. Not every man. I know many women will have eyes for six. If you're below 6 foot tall, you're just like blind. You're invisible to them. But most men are below 6 foot tall. Like the average height of men is like 5'9" or something.
Yeah.
And
In the
so a lot of
US.
them, yeah, a lot of them are a lot smaller than that. Like a smaller man also has the general challenges of just saying something, and he doesn't have the background of I can say something, act a certain way, and like I'm a woman, so they're not allowed to hit me. Does that ask them? They'll be like, no, if I say something wrong, we get punched in the face, get beat
Yeah.
up with this thing. If I'm with a woman and somebody comes up to challenge, am I strong enough to kind of defend this person? So those are concerns that this happens in general. I think kids in general might calculate and look around more. And this is another key thing. I think it's an important thing to think about with kids. They're constantly looking at you and watching and seeing, okay, I need to calculate, is this a way I'm going to behave in a certain way? Because this kind of works. And they look at, okay, and this is part of the reason also why a lot of people, they might do different things in their life, in their personal life, in other things, pick different jobs, have different friends. But when it comes down to relationships, very many people go back and duplicate their childhood relationship because that's what they were learning. They were looking, okay, these are the adults that happen to reproduce or happen to have control over their children. So I'm going to try to learn this kind of behavior and copy that and calculate and figure out how to do that. And there's a lot of complexities that we might not necessarily notice. And I've had my nephews around. My 7-year-old nephew just picks up on certain things that you don't necessarily pick up on when you're an adult because you just take these things for granted. So it's definitely something that I think is it's not negative that women are more selective than men when it comes to actual marriage and relationships. With men, it's normally like I need somebody. Do they like me? Are they fertile if I want to have kids? That's pretty much two of the main things, and then they build up other things. So, does she have cankles? To this person, but that's not something I think too many men have that high on their list.
No, and also I would add too that if we can complain about women being picky, but I would say like the only men who can really be picky are the men with tons of options because it's like that's why like stuff like this is absurd. It's like unless you're like a top actor or musician or whoever and like you're wanted by the majority of women, it's like why are you being so picky? It doesn't make sense
Mm-hmm.
because I mean obviously we're complaining about women being picky, but like it does go the other way too. um and then the one thing I was going to comment on, that thing about people being too similar, it's actually interesting because I had a friend in high school who said this to me, how she had a boyfriend who was basically like a clone of her, and it got like kind of boring. So it's good to
Is
find
she
someone who
boring with herself? Is she bored with herself?
no, but I kind of get what she's saying because my mother has said similar things to me about finding someone who compliments you because like my parents are not identical either, and it's like
Okay.
I can see how it's like they sort of like complement each other, like this one's strong in this area, this one's strong in this area. And then as we discussed before, like okay, if one is interested in something but the other isn't, they have friends that they can talk about that thing about or whatever.
Okay, yeah, that one is something that I've thought of since I was younger. I know people are like, oh, opposites attract. I'm like, why would opposites attract? Like, if you like yourself, you wouldn't
Yeah,
want somebody that's opposite for you. But yeah, complementary is kind of a thing where it's like, yeah, like a table. Think about a table. You want two legs on one side. You want the other two legs on the other side to complement you because you're handling the weight on this side. They handle the weight on that side, but you can't be both on this side holding your two sides and then shoot you there. But you wouldn't want an opposite. Like if you're a table and you have the two legs here, you wouldn't want like two legs that like going up towards the air.
yeah,
You want something that complements you, that kind of reflects some of the things that you have. And yeah, that one, yeah, it's just division of labor. We've talked about this in several videos talking about like getting Austrian
yeah,
economics. Economics is just human actions, the choice of human actions. So yeah, you got to have some of those things. Division of labor works in every single interaction with humanity. I wish more people just looked at economics and applied that to the world. And I think we sort of are going towards that. There's a battle between economics and like sociology type of thing, which is more like subjective than the objective
yeah.
part of economics. So I think that's something to consider.
All right. Let's see. I'll go on to the next section. Well, this is called One Stop Shopping. The guys she spoke to think they do. They feel that women often expect a lot and men can't live up to it. Kyle, the journalist in New York, said that when he was dating, women wanted to find the man who was tall, wealthy, and the emotional equivalent of a gal pal. Women want their men to be gay and straight at the same time. He explained this creates a lot of frustration with men and resentment. Straight men don't want to talk about fashion or nitpick over people's personalities, foibles the way gay men do. Yeah, that's funny. Um, so this reminds her of a conversation with a close friend. She wanted what seemed like the ideal combination of lover and best friend. Actually, her best friend is you. She explained it like this: if I told my husband even half of what I tell you, he'd die of boredom and tune me out. Then we'd get into a fight about how he's not listening to me. Besides, instead of nagging him every day, I complain to you. I was confused. I'm your best friend. Does that mean your husband isn't? Maybe. She smiled, but I still love him more than you. It's a distinction she couldn't even
Hmm.
make a few years back. Yeah, this sort of, as an aside, this sort of goes to what we were saying about each person plays a different role. It's not like you don't value one, you don't value the other. It's both are valuable, but in different ways. Yeah. Division of labor, as you're saying. Yeah. All right. So, um, one day, frustrated that her husband wasn't interested in emotional topics, she had a realization. Even our best friends don't meet all our needs. That's why we have so many close friends, not just one. Does a husband have to be an uber friend who meets every need and shares every interest, who can handle that kind of pressure? Exactly. It's a lesson she thinks more single women should learn. She remembered too what her friend Andy, one of the men who got away, had said about his wife. I think one-stop shopping is overrated. I get passionate at my office with my work or with my friends that I sometimes call or chat with. It's not the same, and boy, it would be exciting to have it with my spouse. But I spend more time with people at my office than I do with my spouse. So she asked, "Do you consider that settling?" Not at all. She has a lot of qualities that I wanted in a spouse, and I was tired of looking for all the things she's not. Most men she spoke to seem realistic about the limitations of one human being providing total fulfillment for another. Kurt, the engaged guy at the bar in Los Angeles, said, "Men don't care if you watch football games together, but women won't marry you if you don't want to hear the minute details of their book club meeting." She
Good
was
point.
starting to think. She was starting to think about the issue this way. Men and women both have to compromise to be with a mate, but they compromise differently. For married men, the biggest compromise is sexual monogamy. For married women, the biggest compromise is not having emotional monogamy. In other words, the compromise is not having one all encompassing emotional connection and having to get some of the connection outside of their marriage. It's having to accept that one human being can't provide a level of emotional intensity that most men don't want in the first place. All right. Thoughts and comments?
Okay. Now again, I'm wondering. I've something that's come up often where we're wondering how much the dating meta right now is kind of pivoting away from the evolutionary environment that we had, which was keyed towards reproduction. And one of the latest download or the latest meta for that human behavioral psychology or that evolutionary environment that the human ape kind of developed in was monogamous marriage. That seemed to work the best to develop stable societies and have enough level of happiness within the societies and things like that. Now, I think reality has caught up to that and people are kind of changing around. Now, the zeitgeist is changing. So we're not necessarily sure if that's what you're supposed to be. Like, because there's a lot of relationships that do work. I've talked about this. I've seen certain things where certain workplaces, like for majority of time, workplaces were very separate. Like the jobs that males and
Yeah.
females did, were just completely separate. So when you're out in society, you weren't really dealing with each other. Then it got to a point where office jobs and things like that started coming by. And then there was a key part in that. There's still a key of society still focused on reproduction. So it was normal for you to go to your office place and have meet your husband either at school or at your office, and yeah, the secretary is dating the salesman, or you're a janitor at this place, and then you meet like somebody who's like a housekeeper. That was a common type of thing. But then now there's a lot of businesses, especially now you're talking about the white collar jobs, where it's verboten, where it's like, oh, we're going to completely ban fraternization between employees. Now that's more, I think, because of like people being sued and things like this. But that stuff still goes on. So pretty much all I'm trying to say is I think there's a recalibration, a recalculation of what relationships are for. A lot of people are trying to use the older meta, the older mindset, the older approaches, the older kind of interactions, because that was a way to select a partner to reproduce with. And people are not necessarily focused on reproduction in that sense, because you don't have to be best friends with somebody in order for them to be the fittest person, both physically, mentally, and otherwise, to reproduce with, to have a healthy child in an environment that works well, that's going to enable that child to be strong. And that kind of mentality does not necessarily select for, God, does this person make you laugh? It's like, no, is this person physically fit? Do they seem to be aware of their surroundings? Do they have the ability to get resources? Are they protective of the household? Those kind of things have nothing really to do with how much somebody likes you. Because think about that with your parents. Yes, people have excellent relationships. I think with peaceful parenting, things like that, you can have good friendships with your parents. But are you friends with your parents? So for somebody to be a good parent, they don't have to be your friend. For somebody to be a good boss, do they have to be your friend? No, because the boss is providing an environment for you to go and do whatever job that you're doing, earn the money
Exactly.
that you're doing. So that's something that you're looking for. So why is it with the job of being a mother, of being a wife, which there is a job in that sense, or being a husband, or being a father, do people think there has to be this aspect of, I feel good? Because even in the start of this, I was like, no, you're supposed to be best friends. And that's something that I had thought in the past. Like, okay, why would you not date your best friend? Why you not marry your best friend? But then I can see the reasoning where if you're focused on these other things, and then if you have the marriage, you can also have a thing where we don't have all these other things in common, but what we do have in common is this kid that's ours, this household that we started. And with those things, the things that are related to that directly, you're fully open on that because both of you are as invested in that as each other. Nobody else is as invested in your children, in your home, and in some aspects of your relationship. You can start new things together. You don't have to have 20 of my hobbies. She doesn't have to have the same 5 hobbies that I have, but we can start 2 or 3 hobbies together. And then we can invest in those things. And then on those things, we're honest. So I think that's kind of a mentality that I can think of. And I think so some of that is broken up because people are not necessarily focused on having kids. Because if you're not having kids, then you just want to have friends. You want to have that hangout partner forever. But then you can have the friends on the side, as she mentioned and as you've mentioned. Yeah.
Well, have you read or heard of a book called Out of Eden?
Uh, 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 uh,
One of Pearl's regulars brought it up. I haven't read the book. I did listen to a talk with the author. It's pretty interesting, but basically, you talked about monogamy being the norm, and that kind of has been because of the West and Christianity. But the author basically argues that when a lot of the Western powers went to Africa, Asia, South America, they encountered a lot of polygynous societies.
yeah.
So, for those who don't know, polygamy means having multiple spouses. Polygyny is where only the men have multiple wives, but the women all share one guy. And I bring that up because the thing is, a lot of people think that, oh, monogamy is the default and deviating from that is perversion, where in reality, the opposite was true. It was only the West took over these areas and basically said, okay, one man, one woman, that's how we want to rule. But that's not the default, and that evolutionary mechanism is still there. So that's why you'll have guys like Drake or whoever sleep with multiple women and women don't care because in the past it was, okay, we're all going to share this guy, we're all going to have his kids, and we're just going to raise them together. Like that was just how things worked. Now,
I think even
I'm not
Adam
against.
Levine was a recent one, and I think his wife came out saying, yeah, she's okay with it. And I think you'd find a decent number of women who are with like that 1% of the highest type of men
Yeah,
are actually okay with it. And it's to me, the cheating is about the dishonesty. If you
yeah,
want somebody who's into polygamy, you can find somebody and still have a solid home relationship with that person. You can still enter a monogamous relationship where partner dating wise you're that way, but you can be polyamorous on the side. Like that can work for some people. It's not going to work for me, but I can see how it can work for people if people are honest and talking. It's just like I would rather have a conversation one on one like this. Or for some people, they might like a conversation with like 20 people at once, and
yeah.
find that works more. But that's them in their mentality and their mindset. But that's it's not for me. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not anti-monogamy, obviously. I mean, I grew up in a two-parent family. My parents have been loyal to each other. As I mentioned at the beginning, they're celebrating their anniversary. I only see my lady. I'm not dating anyone else or looking to date anyone else. And, I mean, there's all sorts of info showing that children do better in two-parent stable families. But
Mhm.
I try to emphasize this stuff because I find, especially with a lot of Christians, they seem to think monogamy is just the norm and that if you deviate from that, you're a pervert or whatever. But like, evolutionarily and historically that's not the case because I mean the general mating strategy, it's like in some ways our mating strategies are at odds with each other because for men it's about spreading your seed because you think about it, sperm is cheap and abundant, but you want to pass on your genes. For women it's can you reproduce with the best guy possible, but that explains why historically what was it like 80% of women reproduce and like 40% of men or something.
Yeah.
I've heard different numbers. They say if you go further back it was even more, it was like one man for every 17 women or something like
Yeah.
that. um but that's how it was, and you see this in nature too. Like I think I've said this before, but the whole thing with like the Lion King, like if the Lion King were accurate, Scar would have killed all those cubs, mated with the lionesses, and produced his
Yeah.
own pride. Like that's how nature is. And humans used to do that too. Again, I'm not advocating we go back to that, but I'm saying that's why there's an aversion. Men don't want to often raise kids that aren't theirs. There's a lot of criticisms of dating single mothers, etc.
Yeah, even there is an aspect of that monogamy type of thing that comes from a point of selfishness in myself, where I'm just like, in the past when I was less self-confident, I would consider, oh yeah, maybe I can enter a polyamorous relationship because I would still be able to be in a relationship. But at this point, I'm just like, okay, no, I don't think I'd want to do that because I'm also thinking the amount of time and energy it takes
Yeah,
to invest in kids for me to pass on enough of my knowledge of existence to a child. I also wouldn't want to have 10 kids. I think it'd be kind of
yeah,
tough to do that with 10 kids. I'd rather have just a few kids, one person, because I want to put all my energy into that person. So I think that's closer to what happens with some of these situations with these kids doing better in those households, because the people are together and you're focusing, you're investing a lot into this kid. I don't want to raise other people's kids. That's also part of the thing. I'd rather be my kid. So there's
Yeah.
some aspects in there, and then to guarantee that, I guess even if you don't have to guarantee that, you can, the woman, you can find relationships where the person can have polyamorous but still only have kids with the main person. There's many organizations for that, but then there's other reasons outside of just like, oh, monogamy by the gods. Because even with Christians, a lot of their biblical people that they look up to are polyamorous and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I look at Noah, supposedly he repopulated the earth after the flood, and who did
Yeah.
he repopulate the earth with? His family members. Like there's a lot
Well,
of weird
King
stuff in those books.
King Solomon had multiple
Yeah,
wives, I think, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Well, because I was also going to add, they, and Pearl harps about this a lot. Like, the reason men didn't want sluts was because they wanted to ensure paternity. Because you think about it, like, DNA testing is very new. I mean, especially in the span of human history, it's nothing. So if a woman's sleeping around, you don't know whether that kid's yours or not. Then do you want to pour your resources, time, and energy into a child that's not yours? And for in most cases, the answer is no. Like, um, a lot of the manosphere guys will tell you don't date single mothers. Like, one point that's come up, I forget if it's Rich Cooper, someone has talked about too, is what sometimes happens that's kind of sad is that the stepfather will actually become close with the child, but then break up with the mother, but then that relationship is just completely severed because it's
yeah. It's
like,
tough.
well, you're not biologically tied to the child and the mother has precedence over you, so that's it. And then it's like you spent all this time helping to raise this kid, and then it's sorry, game over. And it's, is that really the best use of your time and energy?
Yeah. Now this comes another to the picky thing. This is definitely something
Yeah.
that I've seen. Um, I I feel that two of these things is single women, single mothers look at single fathers like obese women look at obese men,
Yeah.
where it's like an obese woman or single mother is more likely to demand their spouse, their partner not be like them
Yeah.
than the inverse. I think a lot of single parents, single fathers would be completely open to dating a single mother. A lot of obese men would be completely open to dating obese women, but the inverse does not necessarily work. Where I think if you just had all these people who are single parents date each other, that would help. And there's a lot of things like we mentioned before, where just being able to relate. There's certain aspects of being a parent to a child with somebody who is not the parent for that child that is very hard. It's that's I think now that is the emotional complexity where you really care for this person, but there's this other being there that came from somebody who you might really dislike. There's the complex emotional complexity that would come from that relationship is something that I think is very hard to convey to somebody who doesn't have that lived experience. And I think if they partnered up together, there would be a way to kind of figure that stuff out and get over that hurdle. And yeah, yeah.
Sure. All right, so this next section's called I Can Be Less Picky in Theory. Annie's 34 and dating again. For 3 years, she was married to a handsome, smart, and funny and exciting guy who was a great boyfriend, but turned out to be a terrible spouse. In retrospect, she overlooked the warning signs. I heard this a lot. She'd always been picky, but after a divorce, she was trying to date differently. What's changed the most is that I still want to have positive feelings about the guy and find him interesting, but it doesn't have to be like I've never felt this way or my toes are tingling or I had that with the guy I married, and I know it can be misleading. Now she says she realizes the other qualities are more important. I'm trying to be more appreciative of kindness and good company, things that are very basic, but I didn't used to focus on as much as I should have. I want someone who is relatively smart, very kind, financially secure, and who wants a family now. I'll redo the math on the physical stuff. I believe that, but sometimes I go back to my old ways. Recently, she said a married friend wanted to set her up with a lawyer. She looked at his Facebook and thought he was cute, but didn't like what he wrote. He had this typical corporate lawyer bio. I thought, ugh, how boring. The friend said didn't say he was a dullard, but didn't say she was interesting either. She said, "What's the downside of meeting him? He's a great guy." But I thought, do I want to make small talk about spicy tuna rolls with this guy? Everyone
Oh
says that I need
man.
to change my attitude and just go and see if I have fun. So she asked Annie how she would feel a few years from now if she's still single, knowing she wouldn't even go on a first date with a guy because she didn't like his corporate bio. She thought about it for
Spicy
a
tuna
minute.
rolls.
She thought about it for a minute. When I'm 35, will I go out with this guy if he's still available? I'm not sure. I'm not there yet. But if in 2 years I wouldn't, then I would think it's my problem versus this is me trying to honor myself. Then it's just me being self-sabotaging. And he says it's not just a biological clock. It's that most of her friends aren't happy marriages, and she wants to have that too. She wants to go through life with someone, and I know that means I have to let go of some of the fantasies I have, and everyone compromises. in theory, I'm absolutely on board with being less picky, but in practice, I'm having a hard time with it. So, like Annie, 39-year-old Jocelyn is on the in on board in theory only. I'm not a monk who can sit alone in my cell just waiting for the perfect scenario, she said. I know that life is imperfect, but I just know that I require certain emotional depth and insight in a guy, and I can't be with someone who truly appreciates my nuances. I'm not going to be interested long term. Evan Mark Katz, a dating coach, that's one from the previous chapters, says that most women he works with start out like Annie and Jocelyn. I can't help who I'm attracted to. I want to compromise, but I just can't. To these women, Evan says, fine, don't compromise. Just don't be surprised if everyone else compromises their way into a fulfilling relationship while you keep chasing a dream that never has a happy ending. All right, thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, just again carrying over with the whole idea of the familiarity. I think one of the key things is this: if there's something you care about that's on your list, that person doesn't have to love it, but I think I can accept where that person doesn't hate the thing. You know, it's like, oh, I like watching football. Doesn't mean they have to watch football, but they shouldn't be like antagonistic and think football is like the crappiest thing ever and like they dislike people who
Yeah.
watch it, because now that can be a point where it's like, okay, like if you're like, okay, I'm spending time this weekend to go watch a football game, they don't have to like, yeah, I'll come with you, but they shouldn't be like, why would you waste your time on that? That is like the stupidest thing to ever do. That I think is a difference. Now that is a part where there's some complexity in the level, the spectrum of like to dislike, but people seem to think it's either like love or hate. Like there's hardly there's a level where people don't really understand that there's parts in the middle there of the pickiness where it's like I pick this, it has to be this and only this in this particular way or nothing at all, you know. And it's like, like yeah, I mean it's yeah, it can work. I was still thinking about those thick ankles. Like I guess maybe you could. What else? Maybe she could wear some different clothes that don't really highlight the ankles, or I don't know. But it's something where yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just because the thing is, I've seen this with other women too, and they're just like, "Oh, I want what I want. I'm attracted to what I'm attracted to," and it's like, I get it, but it's also like, are you getting those men? It's like that's because the results speak for themselves. Like, oh, I want a job that pays 100,000 a year. Sorry, you're gonna have to settle for less. I want what I want. Okay, do you have skills that will get you 100,000 a year? If everybody says no, is the problem all the employers, or you're just not at that level, and you either have to level up or compromise a little? Oh.
Because what else? If thick ankles is enough, is I guess like that's the thing. I can hardly believe it can really be just thick ankles. That's got to be like underlying for something else they're not willing to actually like focus on and discuss.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking like how is everything else settled? Everything else about the person is okay, but then it's just the ankles where it's like no. You know, like these kind of trivial type of things that people pick. I'm like, has a person checked every other block in your life, or do you just not care about other things that are a lot more significant? Like she talked about this one, where are you picky about the trivial things that don't matter, or not picky enough about the often overlooked things? Like, have they overlooked so many other things, and why are they comfortable enough to life in their life to think? And maybe this is part of the thing where people are at. Okay, if men kind of organize the external society, the work society, in order to be a better vehicle for them to handle the aspects that they need to deal with in order to be attractive enough for a woman, or the male aspects of society, the man aspects, the masculine aspects. So they go out and they do that. So that's all handled. They don't have to worry about security. They don't have to worry about resources. They don't have to worry about community dealing with people, because they build a community at work. They have the kind of environment they. So those are the things that women are normally attracted to. But since women have gone into the place and have actually achieved those things no longer attract. They're no longer looking at those things in men since they have those themselves. So now they're getting to smaller type of things. But then what would the inverse of that be with men? Like, what are some of the things that maybe just no, is it just simply access
Sorry,
to
what was your
women?
question exactly? I was trying to.
Okay, I was thinking like there's certain things that men created the workplace. That's kind of part of society in order to be
Yeah.
better men, in order to be
Yeah.
more attractive to women. That's
Yeah.
something I think most people who are just understanding don't understand that if there's this joke by Chris Rock where if a man could sleep with a woman in a cardboard box, we'd all be living in cardboard boxes. But a lot of the things in society are due to trying to impress women or achieve a
Yeah.
certain level to be better for women. Yes, you have the Teslas and people like this who are just outliers who just do stuff just to do stuff.
Yeah.
But then in general, most of that is that. So the things that people get from being in the workplace are things men have. So men are not looking for those things in women because they already have to get those things themselves. Now that you have a certain group of women that are getting into the workplace and getting those masculine, those traits they normally look for men, they normally look for those traits in men. So I can understand if they've already achieved those traits on their own, they're no longer looking at those things for men. But then what explains the inverse for that man who's like the ankles type of thing? Like, well, does he handle, maybe he's in the workplace where he's like, if I have kids, I can hire a nanny. I'm taking my kid to school anyway. So my kid, like the parent, she doesn't have to be a good parent. All she has to be is a womb. So there's maybe some aspect of also, maybe women have, through the government and through other things, have created a social aspect of external society that handles most of the that could be it. Women have created most of the female roles in society outside of themselves. So they're no longer, a man is no longer looking, can a woman educate my kid? Can a woman feed my kid? Can a woman be mentally there and aware about these things? Because they can get those things from daycare, they can get those things from nannies, they can get those things from public schooling and things like that. So you get to a point where now there's trivialities of the things that people are deciding on, and that's a breakdown in society, in my estimation.
I think I might have mentioned this in that one about those women looking for love discussion, but I see this a lot on Pearl's show too. Is I think a lot of women they sort of project what they want in men outward, and they think because they have those traits that makes them attractive. So like, I'm assertive, I'm confident, I work hard, I make good money. Like, from a woman's perspective, looking for a guy, those are attractive traits, but that's not generally what men look for. But they're assuming, oh, if those traits are attractive to me, so if I offer those, men will find me attractive. But then you have to realize men and women aren't looking for the same thing. And I mean, I was talking to one of my friends recently. Like, I mean, I get the argument of the extremes. Like most guys don't want really insecure women because that can cause problems. Most guys don't want arrogant women, that can cause problems. Like, you want a woman who has a healthy sense of herself. But it's like, how often you hear a guy say like, "Oh, what I loved about her first was her confidence." Like, you see that women will feel that way about men. Men don't feel that way about women generally. Do you have a comment on that, or?
Yeah. Yeah, the poor connection kind of came for a bit,
Oh,
but
okay. Sorry there.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely a thing. I think it definitely is. It's kind of like we have a separate series. I guess that might be the longest series, but we talk about different places for the UR What You Consume series. Where we just like I actually just recently just posted like Babo, which is a place that Steven's back working at now. So more on that, you can check that out. But it's kind of like if you really like Italian food, and then you strive to make Italian food, and then you're just like, okay, everybody should like the food that they have, not taking into account that you really liking Italian food meant you were going to be good at making Italian food. But all these other people out there like Japanese or like French food or like American food, Americana type of food. So just because you've achieved the ability to have the things and supply to yourself the things that you really like does not necessarily make you all of a sudden very attractive to the people that you may want to be around you. So I think it's a key thing to kind of remember that. It's also good. I mean, if you find something valuable, try to, I mean, you might as well have it to yourself, but also talked about the complementary type of aspect where there might be certain things that are unique to you that somebody else might not be able to provide, or you might not be, or there's certain things that you might like, but you understand other people might be better at actually achieving those things. So if you use this distribution of God, I forgot the term. What's the economic term?
Division of labor.
Division of labor.
Division.
Yes, if you use that kind of mentality, or division of labor, division of desires, division of achievement, division of resource acquisition, and understand that if somebody is better at doing that, like it's a basic thing. People like security. If you are small, you can be a 5 foot, like a 5 foot 5 foot 100 pound woman and be like, okay, I want to feel secure, so I'm gonna learn how to like do martial arts and do all these things. It's good, do all these things. If you're in a place where you get a weapon and things like that. But if you also understand, I can also find a man who's going to be out there, and I don't have to like walk down the dark streets anymore and deal with this neighborhood. I can find a man who will be out there to do that thing for me because they might be able to handle themselves better in that environment. It kind of makes some kind of sense to say, okay, let him do that for me while I do the things in the home, where he could do these things in the home either. But just him being twice my size doesn't necessarily make him better at making the dinner. So
Yeah.
I might as well have him out there dealing with the stuff in the challenges in society, and coming back home because he's handling the manual labor and things like that. He can handle it. His body can take that wear and tear versus me being out there doing that, and him being in here saving his body and while he's making food. So those are the kind of calculations that I think are not necessarily done anymore. And as I mentioned before, it might be some of the aspects where they completely divorced, where both people are not you're competing for your air conditioned room. A man being like a lot bigger. Yes, there's some aspects that they've looked into to say there's actually some physiology aspects of somebody playing chess. It seems to be having some kind of physiological movement in the same way like a marathon runner. So there's some aspects where there's actually biological things. If your brain is bigger, you're going to have a different capacity. So there's other aspects of that, but that's like some minutiae that doesn't really come into when you're doing like the average type of job that people are dealing with.
Yeah.
But yeah.
A lot of a lot of
Yeah.
I harp about this a lot in my regular life, but like I also think like a lot of women just don't know what men want either, because it's like I remember was talking to my friend and I were talking to his mother about this, and she's like I guess in her later 70s now, and we were saying like there's not a lot of emphasis on what men want, and she was kind of like there was when I was younger. I'm like yeah, there was maybe back then, but I mean in recent years it's like we always hear what women want, but if men want certain things, it's it's misogyny, it's slut shaming, it's fat shaming, all that other stuff, and it's like you can get mad at that men wanting those things, but then it's like don't complain if you're not getting the ideal men you want, because then certain women will say things like, "Oh, I don't care what men want," but then it's like, then you can't complain, "Hey, why am I not getting the ideal men you want?" It goes both ways. Like, you want to work in the nicest restaurant, you better have skills and knowledge to justify a job there. It's the same thing. Like, it's like you don't go into a job interview, "Oh, I want this salary, I want this prestige." Okay, what skills do you bring that justify it? Oh, I don't care what they want. They're not going to hire you. I mean, it doesn't.
But that's the thing, though. In current society, in many cases, that is what you get.
Yeah.
And yes, there's also an aspect of just the gynocentrism where if you're a younger, generally attractive, even though that attractive, people defer to you. But then now you have the social aspect, as I was mentioning, like the women have also had an effect in shaping what society is through the state and the governments and voting and other things. And also just men do things for women. So if women are told, okay, I want society to be this way, men eventually will start shaping society to match what the women want. And if you have a situation where some of these women might be in jobs where they understand, I know all these other people that are as good at me as this or better, and I got this job not because of virtue of my merits. So they kind of get that mindset and think it should be the same in relationships. This is the job. I decided to get this job. I'm here for like affirmative action or what other type of things.
Yeah.
So they might also think they're owed this. And that's one thing that I've seen. Some people feel like they're owed a
Yeah.
relationship of a certain standard because many other aspects in their life have kind of been given to them. And this is something I blame not just women, but also the society, just handing things to people and taking away the aspect, the connection of actual effort and merit to actually get towards things. Just going back to, oh, this person, oh, we have to have a quota for this amount. Oh, we have to have these equal results. So if I imagine that person is happy, I should be equally as happy as these other people I look up to. When you actually look at the actual relationship, those people you think are happier, not as happy as you might actually think they are. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I'm not going to
tough time.
rehash it here. I mean, we did, a series and a few discussions on it, but the college system too. I mean, that's the epitome of that. Like, you have a degree, you're educated, you deserve this income, this is owed to you. And then when reality doesn't pan out that way, they just get angry when it's like they don't realize, okay, you bought into a lie, basically. All
Yeah, yeah, American dream, American
right.
nightmare.
All right, so let's see here. It's called Women Want More. Edna Pollen, a divorce attorney in Denver, said from what she sees, women are dissatisfied because they always want more. For example, they want more romance, help around the house, more passion. Some what she called better income producers. It's a funny way to put it. Sure, there are some men in midlife crisis who initiate divorce, but more than often, it's women who want out, leaving the men confused. For those who don't know, 70-80% of divorces are initiated by women. 90% are college educated, I want to say. The men feel like nobody told me we were having problems. I thought everything was fine. Um, Maybe that's one reason, according to a report on divorce put out by the National Marriage Project at Rutgers. It says here 2/3 of divorces are initiated by women. Again, it depends on demographic and stuff. Uh, Women often expect their spouses to be everything and then feel like something's missing, their soulmate. Keith, who's 36, said that when his wife asked for a divorce, she told him, "I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore." Turned out she was in love with someone else. I have an MBA, a good job in computer security, a pilot's license, own my own house, I'm in decent shape, and volunteer teaching GED classes. I go to church. I'm not the exciting
Jeez.
roller coaster ride. I get paid to be cautious and manage risk. I'm not an exciting Romeo. That's what my ex left me for. She has Paul Amato, a sociologist at Penn State who studies divorced couples, why women do things like this. He said it has to do with a gender difference in expectations. Women often women study women he studied believe that marriages were going to be different, more exciting, or easier. They think the problem is the husband. They think he's become boring, but really it's the marriage that's boring compared to the romance of the dating years. I asked some men about their experiences from marriage. Their expectations for marriage. Alex, who's 39, said he'd been married for 4 years. Said he's fine not getting everything on his wife's wish list because he's deeply in love with his spouse. I wish my wife weren't so uptight about day to day life. I wish she were more tolerant of my slower pace and getting things done. And I wish she were younger and sexier, but isn't that always the case in a long term relationship? Graham, who's 34 and in a serious relationship, said there are always things he wishes that were different, but most of them aren't big enough to be deal breakers. He's ruled out women in the past. It always came down to different values, career goals, money, safety, religion, parenting for future kids, etc. He never broke up with his past girlfriends over things like he wished he were with someone who liked more of the same things, like playing sports or music or theater. He wished he liked to hike. He wished he was with someone who's able to contribute financially even after the kids are born. He wished he were with someone who was small enough he could pick her up during sex. He wished he were with someone who wanted to have sex with the frequency that he did. He wishes there was someone who preferred coming to the apartment in Brooklyn so he didn't have to stay at her place in Manhattan all the time, etc. It's funny. That's kind of funny with me because I live in Manhattan and I go to Brooklyn for her, and then she comes here. It's the opposite. So as she listened to the list, thought about the women who had broken up with guys or would without hesitation if the tables were turned. He didn't share an interest of hers. He didn't make enough money. He wanted sex more than she did. He wouldn't make the trek to her apartment, yet this guy accepted these things. Graham's current girlfriend is by no means perfect, but to break up, he feels would be too picky. His girlfriend isn't athletic and doesn't like sports. She's much taller than he'd like, and there's some potential sexual issues to work out, whatever that may mean. She can be dramatic in situations, but he's sticking with it because the things he does find important seem to be there. She's bright. There's mutual attraction. They laugh and sing together. Similar values, feeling of mutual respect and admiration. Jack, who's a 30-year-old web designer, is about to get married, said he felt bad 10 years ago when he was rejected after confessing his romantic interest to his best friend from college. But as he listened to her dating stories, he realized it wasn't personal. He's seen her reject men based on one piece of information. Like he went a month without medical insurance. How responsible is that? One sentence. He said all the girls I've gone out with, or one pet name he didn't like. He called me dude as a term of endearment. I enjoy her friendship, but who'd want to go out with someone as judgmental as that? She always puts her finger on the one thing that's wrong with the guy. I've been guilty of that in the past, but now I have the opposite problems. What happened when you can't put your finger on what's wrong? I was thinking about after the second date with Mike. She needed to talk to Evan and get clearer on what really matters. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter, and next is part 4 called What Really Matters. So,
Yeah. I actually had that come up with somebody, and she was she's rather accomplished in her field, which is like a full on business, traveling around the world doing this stuff. And she was she actually had a previous marriage, but she came out of that and she met this new guy, and that was one of the questions she had asked me. She's like, "Oh, he doesn't have insurance." She's like, "Yeah, but he's a nice guy. Like, what does it really matter? You have insurance. Like, that can happen." And then somebody else also was like, "Okay, this one wasn't in the background. She's also very accomplished with things like that. It's like, okay, he had some debts. I'm like, yeah, but he's a nice guy. He's paying it back. Like he has a job, stuff. And both of them are in a happy relationship with kids. Like I'm like so. I think people are starting to realize some of these things. It's the assumptions and the things like you talked about with the monogamy type of thing. Some of the things that are based off of just preconceived notions. And I think this also happens a lot with okay, now both of these. Okay, so one of them was yeah, different cultures and things like that. Because a lot of these things, you were living in one area, you had everybody around you kind of living in the same kind of way. If you go to get married, the structure of how you get to meet somebody, the type of people you'd actually have a potential with, the potential future you'd be going with, those things were the options were way more limited in the past for most people than they are for a subset of people living in big urban areas. They're away from their probably environment that they were actually with. So they're not like having their parents reinforce that type of things. They're not having a culture, community around them that kind of tests and sees, okay, I'm familiar in this environment. This man or this woman has lived in this environment that I plan on living with for the rest of their life, and they seem to work, they seem to fit, they seem to be happy enough in this situation. So I can deal with just like, can we reproduce and have kids in this environment? But then if you meet somebody in New York City, they might be from a different continent. You might be from a different place. You don't really have too many friends around you who really know you for like a long amount of time. So the vouching system isn't there. You're not necessarily either. Both of you are not still not quite settled down and sure how you'd actually survive in the long term. Like we talked about this a bit with Stephen before, where he's talking about, okay, if I'm looking to a future, is it doing this in New York City, or do I have to move out of New York City, or just move to the suburbs and things like that, or do move to a different state? Because now when you're thinking about those things, and then once you move to a different state, there might be a whole different other calculations that come in. Maybe this is sort of like a winter person, something like winter that really makes them happy. But then you move to like Texas and you don't have winter anymore, and they all of a sudden lose their mind and become like a crazy other person. So there's all kind of things where I can understand. With this book, we understand there is a challenge. We're not saying people are bad for making decisions. We're not saying people look to get into relationships so they can get a divorce. We're not saying women are in a situation where it's like, oh, we want to work more than we do to have a happy relationship. But at the same point, why would you necessarily want to look out for, in many cases, a man who is your boss at some job versus the man who's at home? Maybe you're having kids with. Like, why is there an aspect of what about society has gotten you to a point where you seem to hold that aspect higher? And people don't really realize that part of the reason men earn so much more than women, part of the reason men deal with certain stresses, commit suicides at higher rates, and deal with other, don't go to the doctor that much, overlook certain these things, because that's their test. And they're doing that often. They're dealing with those other men, dealing with those other struggles in society, all the stressors, and not crying, not being emotional, because they have to hide that stuff. They have to take that stuff away in order to deal with that. Because at home, they're caring for a woman, they're caring for kids, and things like this. And I think, unfortunately, I think fortunately for greater society, women are starting to realize that, hey, getting into this environment is not really all it was looked up, what they thought it was. It's not as glamorous or as desirable as they might have thought it was. And now they're looking back at home life and looking at that also in a different light and saying, okay, that might be actually something where it doesn't have to be exactly like it was in the past, because technology has improved and society has improved, information has improved, and you can still work at home and things like this. So, yeah, it's just a mix of different things. I think people are in general are good. We're trying to do the best for ourselves and others, but it's not a simple thing to kind of figure out. Yeah.
Well, because Pearl harps about this too, because the gender wage gap, it's a myth. It's been demolished a million times. I'm not going to keep repeating it, but like one of the things she always points out to people on her show is like her father was a CEO of a software company. He was in the top like 0.5% of earners. Like I think he made a million a year or something. But she also points out like he worked 70, 80 hours a week. She barely saw
Yeah.
him. She's like, I didn't even really get to know my father till I was an adult. And it's like, the problem with a lot of these people who argue the pay gap is that they look at these people who make all this money and they have these high positions, and it's like, oh, I want that, but they don't realize like what goes into that and what's required of that, especially for years on end. Like, you know,
Mhm.
I might have mentioned before, but like I knew a girl growing up. Her father was a neonatologist. That's the doctors who take care of the really sick babies, and like there are times where they'd go on vacation without him because he just had to work. Like he'd have to come in on holidays, all that. So it's like, yeah, they have a beautiful house and a happy family, but it's like, look at what it went into achieving that. And I think the problem is that a lot of these feminist types who see the pay gap, it's just, oh, these people are making more money. That's not fair. I want that. And it's like, but you don't realize what went into that. Or there was a girl on Pearl's show who's training to be a doctor right now, but then Pearl made the point how a lot of women who are doctors, they end up actually getting married and just staying home because the pressure ends up being a lot. I mean, a lot of men snap under the pressure too, but like a lot of women decide like, okay, I'm going to be a doctor, but then if I fall in love, meet the right guy, I'd rather just stay at home and raise the kids because it's like, that is a job in of itself, but like the pressures of being a doctor is just too much for most people. Oh.
Yeah, because that's the thing. People say, okay, we've had unpaid work by working at home. Saying there's all this unpaid labor that women have, and then at the same point, they say, yeah, I can be a high flying like businesswoman and also a great mom at home. It's like Do you think you can be a high flying businesswoman at two different offices? No, you probably don't think that. So why do you
Yeah.
think you can do that at home and also at you can't be like teacher of the year at your school and also teacher of the year to your own kids. Like there's going to be a trade off there. You have such a limited amount of time in that situation.
Because I know somebody like that too, who she made the argument my mother had it all, and like I'm not going to get into details of who it is, but like her mother basically worked all the time. She barely saw her, and this person got into trouble and stuff because her parents weren't really around. And it's like, yeah, they gave you all this material stuff, but it's like they're not really involved in your life. And then the parents ended up getting divorced anyway. Is that really having it all? Like I don't really think that's like, it's that whole thing of like you excel in one area or you like excel in one area and kind of half-ass the other things, and it's like you're not going to nail all of those. Like there's only so much time in the day, you only have so much energy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think from this conversation we've done this part. Do for you those of y'all who thought at the start, do you think we were right? I still think I'm right in saying women are more picky,
Yeah.
and I still think it makes complete sense why women are more picky and shall continue to be more picky when it comes to relationships. This is some of the things that might end relatively soon once we start rethinking how comfortable it is, how socially acceptable it is to get to into like a polyamorous relationship or stuff like that, where some women might be like, I can imagine these kind of relationships where a man is like, okay, I've had maybe one kid. I don't really
Yeah.
want to have too many more kids anymore. I'm past that age, but this other woman likes me as a friend or other like the job and stability that I have, but they want to have kids. And then they decide, okay, I'm going to have a kid. I'm just going to get a sperm donor because this guy is physically fit and that guy was. So I'm going to have kids with that person. And then somehow that man, you might find more men that are more open to raising a kid in that kind of sense because they're not really that physically attached to passing on their own genes. But right now in the society, that would be something that's frowned upon. That's not something that would be looked upon. But then there might be a million people who would be comfortable in that kind of relationships. A lot of these divorces, it might just be a situation where somebody's like, I just want to have some uh, different kind of physical relationship with somebody, and maybe they try it and like, okay, I'm kind of over that, and then they come back. But everything else, like if you never actually found out about that, you'd be completely okay with it. Or if you, it's not necessarily you never found out, but if the rest of society never looked upon you as a lesser of a person and that was weighing down on you because you're looking at that social status, there is aspects of that where these are things that kind of play into it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people who we look at in these happy relationships, then you find out something about their relationship. They looked as happy as they were before, or you were dating somebody, and then all of a sudden you find out they've been doing something on the side.
Yeah.
Every experience you had with that person, if you went on a vacation with somebody and they truly made you laugh and you really had good memories, and then you come home and find out they were kissing somebody at their office,
Yeah.
nothing about that vacation changed. Nothing about the jokes that person told you changed. Nothing about the memories that you've had changed. But then you mentally all of a sudden start looking at this person in a different way. And how much is that due to if let's say you'd ask them directly if they were cheating on you and they'd said no, that lying in, yeah, that's something. But what if that had never come up? It was just something you never actually knew about. Now, in a different situation, what if she had told you and before it happened and that had happened, but she was still coming to you on the vacation? There's some people who might fit into that situation. So I'm just thinking this needs to open up and you have that kind of different environment. Another thing that will definitely change it is artificial wombs, where now
Yeah.
you have a different calculation of assuring that your genes are together where you can agree with a woman, it's not even her genes. I just really like this person because we really get along really well. They don't want to have kids, but I want to have kids. They're okay with me having kids with an artificial womb by putting my genes with somebody else and I pick somebody, and they don't mind raising the kid with me, or they don't mind working in the office and then I have somebody else who's in my home. We're living in a more communal type of area with different families and we're raising the kids together in a different kind of environment. We're not worried about sending them to school. So you have like a pod type of situation. That might be a more working relationship because one of the partners might never want to have kids, but still like the person enough and appreciate, like we talked about before, where somebody doesn't have to hate what you're doing. They
Yeah.
don't want kids for themselves, but they don't hate kids. So they don't hate their partner having kids, but they don't want to have it. So these kind of things in my mind, and some books and ideas and things that I'm writing and things that I've read, that I'd like to explore that. And I think the landscape of relationships is going to look quite different in 50 years. I think monogamy is still going to be the primary form of it, like 50% plus, and then there's going to be like another 25% with serial monogamy, or it's like we together to do this for this amount of time, and you like renew, just like an office, you renew your contract after a certain amount of time, and then
Yeah.
you'll have a myriad of different sorts of arrangements soon. And I think a lot of these situations will kind of work themselves out.
Yeah, I'm just tired. Like some of these excuses people make. Like, I mean, if you watch Pearl's show, obviously you see a lot of this. Like, they'll say things like, "Oh, women make these decisions because they're not educated." It's like, okay, you know where babies come from. You know when you're
Yeah.
ovulating. Pearl has even said she's like, I've sat down with women and I've gone through. Here's all these red flags with this guy, and they basically don't care. And then he breaks her heart, and she's wondering why. I'm like, well, I tried to warn you. So I don't think it's a question of education. I think it's just it's not holding people accountable for their decisions. Like you can warn people, but it's like, and that's the debate I've had with the one friend. Like, I know in the UK, if a woman gets pregnant and has a baby, the government just gives her an apartment. So you have all these women who say, I don't care if I get pregnant because the government will take care of me. And it's like, there's a lot of naive people who think that like people won't take advantage of this, or it's like if like if the guy faked to, because the thing is, women will say things like, oh, he seemed like a nice guy, whatever. It's like I find that's really rare. I find you can usually tell who the person is. It's just you were attracted to him for other reasons, so you're willing to overlook all the red flags. And when it blows up in your face, you're crying. No.
Yeah, you're just saying he seems like a nice guy. We look at the people who vote, and like people did look at Biden and truly believe that he seemed like he had all his faculties and was exactly the same person that he was
Yeah.
back when he was vice president. Most people would say that, but it's because you dislike Trump, or there's certain aspects, or you just used to being voting a certain way, or there's certain other things he was promising to do. You had student loan debts, and he was hoping. So there's things that you'll say that in public. And as I mentioned, I wish it was just more open for people to just be who they are, just be open and say like, I'm doing this because I want my student loans paid off. That's why I'm voting for him. Don't talk about he's like, oh, he's a brave guy. He's really mentally there. He's okay. Like no, just say you want your thing and just go out there and do it and still vote for him. That's something I think I would appreciate, because this whole idea, it's like, oh, he seemed like a nice guy. It's like, no, he didn't seem like a nice guy. You just don't care if he's a nice guy, and that's okay. You don't have to sleep if you find this person physically attractive. If for some reason you feel like you have to get out of this area that you're in, and this person is going to supply you a home or an apartment and a thing like that, if there's issues from your childhood that you don't necessarily understand and this seems to be attractive to you, there's other things in there. But don't say he seems like a nice guy, because
Yeah.
I think people do understand. There's ways people understand to figure out who a nice guy is. There's ways people understand. There's red flags, like you say. People see these red flags. Always like hindsight is 2020 thing. When after it's done, like, oh, I saw these things. You saw them the first time. You just ignored them the first time because there's other things that were more valuable before.
Yeah.
I don't believe people are anywhere close to as blind as they claim. But I also could be wrong. Maybe some people are just really unobservant. I don't know.
Well, I think too, and I know like there was that girl who was becoming a doctor on Pearl's show. Was like Pearl was explaining to her, she's like, the girl's like 24 now, and she's like, last few years you went for the bad boys because they were either attractive, charismatic, whatever the things you liked, and then she complained, oh, they're trash, and it's like, well, you're going for men that are highly desirable to most women. All the things that make him desirable to you make him desirable to other women as well. Because of that, they have a lot of options, so those men play the field, and it's like, again, we can debate the morality of what they do and why, but it's like it just comes down to, okay, if they have women throwing themselves at them left and right, they're going to take advantage of that. That runs in line with the male reproductive strategy. You could go with an average guy and he'd be loyal and committed to you, but it's like, no, that's not good enough or whatever. And it's like, okay, but I mean, this is the outcome you're going to get, unless you're that
Mhm.
guy's absolute best choice. All
Yeah. Yeah.
right, I don't have much else to say really, so
Yeah, that's it for me, Till. This is this, and as we mentioned, we shall have more of this. That's jumping to chapter 16. There's 11 more chapters, so we'll probably jump around. Stephen
skip around.
normally
Yeah.
goes through, yeah, and he might pull out some different parts or different ones. So I think you could expect probably at least two or three more parts of this series.
Yeah.
But if you enjoyed this and you'd like more content like this, there's a lot more in this particular series. There's a lot more in other kinds of series. We're scheduling times to actually talk. I keep talking about this, but I'll announce some stuff soon to get in a situation where we can have more communications, more discussions, more organized sort of type of thing. Want to get off more out of the social medias type of platforms and probably get like a local to get more central location where we can talk about some of these, because some of the ideas that I come up with, some of the content that we discuss, for me doing this content, I've had this YouTube channel for like 5 years now, but it's mostly just been posting, getting my ideas out, and then from then on, it was getting the comments. So anybody who's listening, thank you all very much for listening. Let me know in the comment sections, because having these conversations with Stephen as well and the other people, other few people that have come by, very thankful, because some of the things I can think about this stuff a lot by myself. I can even create different characters in my mind, but creating these different characters in my mind, like I'm doing these sketches and things, I can create these characters, but these characters are still aspects of my mind. When I have a conversation with Steven, when I have conversations with people in the comment sections, they can help me kind of figure stuff out. And also with this kind of thing, like a lot of the things Lori Gottlieb is talking about, is she's talking to other people, trying to figure things out. And this is something that I think is sadly lacking, and it's also part of why I want to get out of social medias, because like on Facebook and some of these things, you're not really conversing with people, you're just talking past people. It's like a very
Yeah.
antisocial social network. I want to get in a situation where I can be more social and have more conversations, have more exchanges of ideas that inspire other ideas, and we can kind of talk some of these things out. And yeah, any other things you want to say in closing?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so check out the other content that I have. Links below wherever you're listening to this. Guys, gals, and everybody else in between. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.